Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. Today in our reading we read about a time when the disciples were caught in a storm once again. If you remember in Matthew chapter 8, we already read of an account of when they were caught in a storm, and Jesus very powerfully calmed the storm. And of course this was amazing. The people were amazed and they said, "What kind of man is this that even the winds and the sea obey him?" In Matthew chapter 14, we have another account of the disciples being in a storm. But the circumstances are a bit different. And I believe that they are different for a particular reason. Here the Lord is testing them and teaching them a lesson on faith and expanding their faith with this change of circumstances. And one of the main differences between these two stories is the first time Jesus calms the storm, he's in the boat with them. If you remember, he was in the boat. He was actually asleep in the boat, and the storm comes up, and they come up to him and say, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing." And then he says to them, "Why are you afraid, you men of little faith?" And he gets up and rebukes the storm. But he was in the boat. In this particular occasion in Matthew 14, Jesus, after feeding the 5,000, he says, "You know what, you guys go ahead of me, get in the boat, and cross over the sea." And so Jesus finishes up with the 5,000. He goes to the mountain to pray, and the storm comes up, and he's not anywhere near them. He's not in the boat with them at all. And I think that there is some significance to that, because I do believe that Jesus knew when he sent them off to go to the other side that a storm was going to come. And it could very well be that he purposely sent them out to encounter this storm to teach them a lesson about faith. You see, they struggled with faith with Jesus in the boat, with Jesus there with them. But they needed to even have faith when Jesus was not in the boat. And so this will be a further testing of their faith. You know, what did they learn from the last time? Jesus calmed the storm. They knew that he was in control. He had power over the storm, but perhaps their faith was limited to thinking, well, Jesus has to physically be here to save us. And so here they are going out on the sea without Jesus, by themselves, and this great storm comes up. This great wind and waves come contrary against them. Imagine what they're feeling at that time. I'm sure they're feeling very vulnerable. There's too many things that make us feel more vulnerable than when we get caught in a storm. You just feel powerless when you're in the midst of a storm, and I'm sure they felt that way, and they're very afraid. But Jesus comes to them, and he comes walking on the water. At first they don't recognize him. They think perhaps he's a ghost. But then he calls out to them and tells them, "Don't be afraid. Take courage. It is I." And so Jesus shows us some things with this. He shows us that he knew what was going on with the disciples. He knew the fact that they were in the midst of a storm. And the second thing is that he came, even walking on water, to come and help them, to rescue them. And these are some important things that we need to realize in our own lives. You know, one of the great testings of our faith is the fact that we don't see Jesus. We don't have him here in the physical form as the disciples had them. Our walk before him is truly by faith. As a matter of fact, in John chapter 20, when Jesus is talking to Thomas, in verse 29, Jesus said to him, "Because you have seen me, have you believed? Blessed are they who do not see and yet believed. There's a special faith that comes when a person doesn't physically see Jesus. And it takes great faith when we go through the storms and the trials of this life to be able to recognize the fact that even though I don't see Jesus, I do believe in him, and I do love him, and I do trust him. It does take a lot of faith, but it's something that we need to learn just as the apostles needed to learn, because if you remember, they were going to go out and they had a big task before them. They had to go out and preach the gospel to the whole world. And Jesus was not going to physically be there with them, but he did leave them the promise that, lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So he was going to be with them. He was going to see what they were going through. He was going to give them the strength to endure the trials. But he wasn't going to physically be with them in the way that he was with them before. And they needed faith in Jesus even when they couldn't see him. In 1 Peter chapter 1, in verse 8, it says, And though you have not seen him, you love him. And though you do not see him now, but believe in him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, obtaining as the outcome of your faith the salvation of your souls. So just another verse to bring home the fact that our faith is a faith without sight. But we need to realize that when we go through storms, we need to know that Jesus is just as present with us in those storms, even though we don't physically see him, and that he sees what we're going through, and he's even willing to go to great lengths to come and help us, whether it's calming the storm, pulling us out of the storm, or just strengthening us through the storm. Jesus is going to come walking on the water in one way or the other. Another thing, of course, that is noteworthy of this story is the fact that Peter gets out of the boat. He says, Lord, if that's you, let me come out on the boat. And Jesus says, come. And so Peter gets out of the boat, walks on the water, and comes towards Jesus. But then when he begins to see the wind, he becomes very frightened and begins to sink. And he cries out, Lord, save me. And then Jesus stretches out his hand and takes a hold of him and says, you of little faith, why did you doubt? So here's another lesson from this story. And this might seem as a strange statement. Jesus says, you of little faith. Like, wait a minute. Peter was the only one out of everybody in that boat that had the faith to step out onto the water. And keep in mind, this is not walking, you're at a swimming pool, it's a calm, nice day, and Jesus is on the other side of the swimming pool, and you say, let me walk on the water, but even if you fall through, you'll be okay. There was a great big storm. There was wind, there was waves tossing about, and Peter still has the faith to step out of the boat, and especially when nobody else would. And so we might say, why did Jesus tell him that he had little faith? Well, it's because his faith was not an enduring faith. It was somewhat of an impulsive faith, perhaps. Maybe his faith he didn't really think through what he was doing, and he just acted on faith and did it. But once he got out in the situation, he began to sink. And in any case, he didn't have the faith to walk all the way to Jesus and to keep his eyes fixed on Jesus the entire time. And so even though we might exercise great faith at the beginning of something, maybe a storm is brewing in our lives, and we exercise great faith, great obedience to the Lord. Maybe we're stretching out to do some type of great work for him that requires great faith. Even though we start out strong, starting out strong isn't enough. Only faith that is strong to the end, that endures to the end, is considered valuable and considered strong. We have to have a faith that not only calls out to Jesus and says, let us walk on the water, but that continually keeps our eyes fixed on Jesus, that isn't wavered by the winds and everything else going on, but that we walk directly towards Him, keeping our eyes on Him at all times. This is what the Hebrew writer says, or he says something similar to this in Hebrews chapter 12. He says, "Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith." So we keep our eyes fixed on Him, and we keep our eyes fixed on Him all the way to the end. The last thing to say about this is that when Jesus got in the boat, the storm did calm down, and they were amazed once again. But this whole scenario was all about strengthening the disciples' faith. At least that's what I believe. I really think that that's what it was. It was Jesus giving them another test of faith to strengthen their faith, to prepare them for the future, what they would have to do once He left them physically from this earth. And hopefully these things were helpful to you today. Think about faith and the things that we need when it comes to faith. Thank you guys for listening in today. I love you guys. Hope you guys have a great day. God bless.